Great. So I'm going to call to order this meeting of the Select Board. It is March 11th, 2019. I believe that the Finance Committee is also here. You guys will be. School committee members are here, but I don't see a quorum. Correct?
They don't have to be here till 7:15.
Understood. So the first thing on our agenda is the announcements and agenda review. We then have a public comment period and the town manager's report at 7:10. Within that town manager's report, we will have potential discussion of the select board's agenda schedule. We will talk about emergency repair required for Prescott School electrical panel. We will discuss and perhaps determine whether or not to request short-term rental excise taxes determine whether or not to request short-term rental excise tax approval at 2019 Springtown meeting. We will discuss a request from KP Law to represent various towns on police mutual aid agreements. We will review the updated draft of the 2019 Springtown meeting warrant, and then the fiscal 20 budget discussion is on there. At 7:15, we are in joint session with the moderator, potentially the school committee, Groton representatives, to consider the appointment of Rob Flynn and Patricia Madigan as representatives to the Neshoba Tech High School Committee. Under other business, we will discuss installing no littering signs pursuant to the new bylaw and determine a member to serve on it says Tri-Town Budget Committee, which I think is really the two towns and then the school committee.
Probably should have said tri-board.
Yep, absolutely. We have our ongoing issues for discussion, liaison reports, and 2 sets of minutes for approval. Regularly scheduled meetings of February 25th and March 4th. Does anyone have announcements? All right, we will jump along then to public comment. Yes, Art. If you can grab a microphone.
Madam Chairman, I put together a document and sent you an earlier version of it yesterday. And this is a consolidated document that's a little bit different. Relative to the request for additional 2 firemen for the fire department. And I have copies for the finance committee. Now. What I tried to do is go through all the existing documents that have been presented over the last year or so, 8 months, and consolidate them into one document to avoid any confusion or issues relative to what has been published, what has been said, and what's been presented. So I'll give you time going forward to review these, and if you have any comments, please get them back to me. Appreciate that. Thank you.
Very good, thank you. Any other public comments? All right, and we'll move along to the town manager's report.
Thank you. I'd like to start, Tom Delaney is here. I'd like to start with the emergency repair required for the Prescott School electrical panel. Tom, if you want to come up to the table. Part of our process when we took over the building from the schools as managers and then leased it out to the Friends of Prescott is we were required to provide building insurance on the building itself, not on the stuff that takes place, but on the building and grounds. So our insurance carrier came out, they did an inspection of the building, and they said, yeah, we'll insure you, but you have to do certain things in order to maintain that insurance. And one of those things is an electrical panel upgrade. And I think I put in my town manager's report, I explained to you what that is. And that's way over my head, so I'll let you read it and you can see what that is. I'm not an electrician. So in order to do that, we had an estimate somewhere between $10,000 and $15,000, and it gets a little dicey if it's greater than 10,000. It's under 10 now?
It is.
Oh, good.
Yep.
Oh, good, because if it was over 10, you get into a whole procurement, chapter 149 issue, which would have made the price more expensive. So we need about what, 9,000, 10,000?
$9,500.
$9,500 in order to do this emergency repair of that system. Otherwise, if we don't do it, our insurance will get canceled on the building, and I don't want that to happen. The problem I'm having right now is where to get that money. We appropriated $62,000 to maintain that building over 3 years, and that budget was based on $12,000 a year, between $12,000 and $14,000 a year doing the landscaping, and we thought insurance was about $6,000. Well, the insurance, that's what the school department paid on that building when they insured it. That was their property insurance on it, building insurance on it, not their liability. Well, our insurance company's telling us it's $12,000. So right off the bat, we're $6,000 in the hole on our $62,000 estimate. And please keep in mind that we went to town meeting on 10/1 on that estimate. The insurance came in at 10/24, so it came in after the fact, and we were doing it on estimate when we went to town meeting. We've also had a major amount of issues that have come up, that some of it we charged to the Prescott School article, the doors and things like that, and some of the stuff we didn't have a budget for, so Tommy charged it to our $62,000. And Tommy can answer some of those questions, and that's why he's here tonight to do that. But the bottom line is I need $10,000 in order to fix the electrical system to keep that building insured. And as landlords, I believe it's our responsibility to fix that electrical panel. So, Tommy, I don't know if you want to talk about some of the repairs that you had to do outside of the, outside of the landscaping and the insurance.
Sure.
I just want to, Mark, before we jump to Tom, is this upgrade required because the building is tenanted, or because, would we be paying to have this work done if the building were vacant?
If the building were vacant, we would not be paying to have it done, because we would pay a vacant building insurance for, which was estimated to be about $17,000. This is required because the building is occupied.
Okay.
Wait, you just said a vacant building policy would be 17?
Yeah, because a mothball building is more expensive, because there's nobody there.
So,
Becky.
an inhabited building is 6,000,
But 12,000.
12,
12,000,
12,000.
okay.
That's a good question, Allison.
okay. Sorry, continue now.
So we had a bunch of other repairs that were basically hanging out there when this whole thing was going on. There was the rails going to the back set of stairs that go down to the boiler room. There was the roof going over the boiler room. We had to fix and repair that, so that's been an added cost. We just paid $700 for what's called a boiler steam trap survey. Basically, so there was a bunch of the steam traps on the bottom of these registers in the basement that once they fill up with water, they get pumped back up and they go around somewhere. I'm not quite sure all the technical stuff with those, but that's why we hire people to do it. But they're, after they do the survey, they apply for, they figure out all the parts we need, total bill for that somewhere around $14,000. They apply to National Grid, we get half of that back, but that's something else that needs to be done we haven't paid yet. So Littleton Lumber for railings, American Plant, there's the steam trap survey, we paid. The anticipated bill for the boiler repair is up there. So back to the electrical panel, it's old system, has to be special ordered to come in.
Yep.
Have it all online. I talked with our normal electrician a few minutes ago before I walked in the door. It's about $9,500. It's a 2-week lead time on ordering the panel because they're all custom built. So after I get out of the meeting, hopefully I'll tell him to go ahead and order that.
We have no choice. The insurance company has put me on notice. If we don't fix that electrical panel, they will cancel our insurance. I really don't want to have the insurance canceled. Gary had sent me an email asking me some questions, and I thought it was very helpful in your discussion, and the answers to Gary's questions are up on the screen. We set aside $62,000 for 3 years. We took over the building on September 1st, 2018, when the schools vacated the building. I've given you a spreadsheet. You have a very detailed spreadsheet on all the money that has been spent by the town on the Prescott School. So there's an itemized list there for you that I shared with you. And then Tommy just talked about the additional costs that we anticipate coming down the pike that we'll have to do. And then the question was, why can't we use the money allocated for use over 3 years? You absolutely can use that $10,000. I think we have about, what, 15 grand left? Maybe a little bit more.
A little bit more.
A little bit more.
Yep.
We can use that, but I would need to go back to town meeting to replenish that if we want to continue with the agreement that we have with the Friends of Prescott, that we would cover those costs. Yes?
Becky?
So we have in the capital budget something called the municipal building fund that's for what I thought it was for this kind of thing, unanticipated repairs to our buildings.
That did not include Prescott.
Well, but we,
Because we had the separate fund for Prescott, the 62,000. That 25,000 is for the Legion Hall, the Town Hall, the police station, the 3 fire
but
stations.
I guess my question is, they're all buildings that are municipally owned, so could we not tap into that fund?
I don't know whether you have that,
I don't have enough to take care of ours, Becky, and now we're adding another one. I mean, we'll have to start increasing those numbers, and whenever budget season came, it was pretty clear to budget for our buildings and not for this one.
Well, I
If
mean, I
there's any,
guess I have a little bit of a problem of our buildings not including this one. This is our building.
but we funded the $62,000 specifically for Prescott. So we had a separate appropriation for that. It was not part of the 25,000 for the other municipal buildings.
and that's the one we've been
And
drawing
that's
off
how we
of.
budgeted. I understand your point, but please understand how we budgeted.
Right.
A great analogy of this building, and I told this to Mark the other day, when we first took over, when municipal buildings, or myself took over the country club, it was, for a bunch of years, it was like a hole. And we had to do repair after repair after repair. I see this building being the same way. Do we have if we start tapping off of the budget that we have, that we've been running for the regular municipal buildings, even though this is a municipal building, but it's been a newly added building and with unknown costs that just happened this year, we're gonna run that other budget dry. Because there's gonna be upcoming stuff that I don't know about in that building because we're still learning the building. Unless you want to, there wasn't a building that was budgeted for when we created our municipal building budget because it was outside of our normal operations.
So I guess I would just suggest that going forward, we do need to remember that we own this building, and we do need to budget appropriately for maintaining it.
We thought we had with the
I understand.
62,000.
I understand, and I think, I mean, there's a lot about this building that has not been apparent at first glance, second glance, third glance, and fourth glance. So, we're under, we have to do this. There's no choice in that, in my mind.
Jack, can you grab the microphone? Sorry.
I heard the question asked earlier, would you be doing this if you weren't renting the building? And I heard an answer that really I don't think answered the question. I think the answer was, well, you're paying, maybe it was $17,000 because you're renting it, and you could be paying $12,000. That's not the answer to the question. That's how much extra does it cost to rent or to pay insurance if you're renting versus if you're not. I think the question is, if the building was vacant, would you have to do this repair? Right.
I answered that question. I said we would not have to do the repair if the building was vacant. I'm sorry if I wasn't clear.
I think the answer was that you would pay $12,000 for insurance instead of $17,000 for insurance.
There was 3 different answers in the question. There was a couple of different questions asked. The question was, would we have to do this repair if the building was unoccupied? The answer is no, we would not.
But we would pay
We
more
would
in
pay more in
insurance.
insurance.
So just at a high level,
But not because of that.
I think it's important personally that we keep, regardless of how much revenue and spending we're moving in and out of this account, I think it's important to keep Prescott kind of isolated from the other town buildings, simply so that we can track it for the first few years, so that we have a feel for what we're spending. To me, it looks like, and I don't know that this is accurate, but Mark, we're 1/6 of the way through that period, and we've already spent over half of that money.
Correct. Allison, if I may.
Yes.
This discussion is going to go on for a little while. We have members of the school committee here and the moderator here, and
Yeah.
our school committee rep is here as well. I see Rob. I don't think this is going to take that long. If we can turn it over to Jason to manage that and then come back to this subject, if that's okay with the board?
I think
So we don't
that's
have to keep the school committee here
Yep.
and the moderator here for a long time,
Yep.
and Rob here for a long time. Mr.
Thank you,
Moderator,
guys.
it is your meeting.
So please grab a microphone.
There's plenty of microphones.
Exactly.
All right, great. The members of the school committee? 3? Okay. Who's acting as the chair of the school committee? Mr. Kubik? Just want to quickly. Great, so the school committee is called to order, the board of selectmen is called to order. We're here tonight for the purposes of appointing our representative to the Neshoba Valley Technical High School, as well as an alternate.
Jason, are they both 3-year terms?
They're both three-year
They're
terms.
both 3-year terms,
Yep.
okay.
So we will start by, the chair will accept or open the floor for nominations for representative to the Neshoba Tech School Committee for a term of 3 years. Do I hear a nomination? I understand Mr. Flynn would accept being reappointed.
I will nominate Rob Flynn.
Mr. Flynn has been nominated. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Are there any other nominations? The name of Mr. Flynn has been entered onto the floor for nomination, for election. Are there any other nominations? Hearing none.
Because, if I may interrupt, because Barry Peace is participating remotely. it
I
has to
did
be a
not know
roll call-
that.
It has to be a roll
Yes.
call vote.
Good evening, Mr. Pease.
I was remiss in not announcing that. Apologies to everyone. Barry is participating remotely.
All right, we'll have to call a roll call then.
I am here.
Are there any other nominations? Seeing none, the chair will close nominations. Mr. Flynn's name is the only one in nomination, but we still have to call a roll call. So we will start with Ms. Manugian.
Manugian, aye.
Peace, aye.
Pease, aye.
Geiger, aye.
Pine, aye.
Oh, sorry.
LeBlanc, aye.
Rayner, aye.
And Kauppi, aye. Passes unanimously. Congratulations, Mr. Flynn. Now for the purposes of choosing an alternate.
Mr. Moderator, Patricia Madigan submitted a letter of interest to serve. We invited her tonight. Unfortunately, she could not make it tonight, but she definitely wants to continue to serve as our alternate if the board is willing, this board is willing to reappoint her for 3 years.
Okay. With that information in mind, the chair will open the floor to nominations. Is there a nomination for alternate for 3-year term?
I will nominate Patricia Madigan to serve as alternate.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
It's been, Patricia Madigan's name has been entered and seconded. Is there any other nominations? Seeing none, the chair will close nominations and call a roll call. Ms. Pine.
Pine, aye.
Manugian, aye.
Geiger, aye.
Peace, aye.
LeBlanc, aye.
Rayner, aye.
And Kauppi, aye. Congratulations to Ms. Madigan. Seeing there's no other business before this committee, do we just call a roll call to adjourn?
I would adjourn this portion of
Maybe Rob would like
yeah.
to say
So-
something.
Oh, no, this is great.
Does Rob want to
Oh,
say
okay.
anything? No?
I thank you for the breakfast that you guys attended. Ms. Pine, Mr. Geiger, the town moderator, Mark, and sent Patricia on behalf of the town, and Mr., I'm gonna maybe Colby Dewey, the FinCom represented, they came to our breakfast that is kind of our state, which is which came to our state of the house of basically our town meeting. So I'd like to thank you guys for coming.
Thank you for serving.
Appreciate it.
All right, if there's no other business, the chair will declare this joint meeting closed. Maybe the school committee needs to adjourn officially.
Make a motion to adjourn.
I'll second that motion.
All in favor?
Thank you so much for coming,
All
Mr.
right.
Moderator. Thank you, Rob. Thank you.
Thank
And
you.
now back to your regularly scheduled programming.
Thank you.
So, back to this discussion. Thank you, Allison, for doing that. I
Yeah,
think that was
absolutely.
helpful.
Bud, you had your hand up? Thank you.
On the financial numbers that are, we here, Mark, on that page 3 where it says, if we spent 40,000, has that been charged to the Prescott $62,000? Or is that just a note that says we've spent 40 grand? Page 3, I think at the bottom, if you net out the 8,700, it says 40,000. That one?
Yes.
Right here?
Yeah.
Yes.
What's, if you go one more page, is that page 3? There you go. There's the 40,000. Is that So we've charged to the 62,000, or we've just charged to a separate account? I'm just trying to.
Tommy, some of that, I think all of this was charged to the Prescott 62,000. Some of the work that was done, the doors that we had to do
Yeah.
and stuff like that, I received permission from the CPC and the select board to spend that money out of the money that was appropriated for the sprinkler system.
Is that the 8,700 there, or is that something different?
Tommy, do you know?
Go back up.
Page 1 has that on there.
Yes, there is. There was a couple, yes, but it should have been more than 8,700.
I'm just trying to understand how much is in that fund, because is it 30,000 left, or?
So some of, on the right-hand column, like, about 6 transactions down, there's 1, 2, 3, railings,
Right.
excavation on the, so 5,000, 2,000, 1,000. Those were reclassified from some of those top ones to CPC, because that was the bottom ramp in the
Right.
back. A lot of this other stuff was miscellaneous stuff that came up. You see Home Depot. Those were ours. Those were ones that I had Quentin do, our on-staff handyman, stuff that he did. We can just go right through them real quick. It doesn't
No, I
take
just
too
want to
long.
understand that the total, if it's $40,000.
40,000 out of the 62 is what we spent.
So it says whether we charge the 10 to that or not, or the 9,500, which I think we should. But it says we're gonna run out of money next year easily, because we've got another $12,000 coming in for insurance.
And
And we've
landscape.
got another $14,000 coming in for landscape. And that was what our 20,000 was 14 for landscape and 6 for insurance. That was the 20. Times
Yes.
3 equals basically 62.
There's $32,000 left of the 62.
There was, because there was two accounts, Bud. There was one that was a prior year, and then the addition. So we drew one down,
Okay.
and now we're into the.
So we
last
have $30,000 basically left,
Correct.
of which we're gonna use, we just said,
We need 9,500 unless the FinCom gives me a reserve fund transfer.
well, plus we're gonna spend 12 plus 14. We're gonna spend 28,000 next year on just those 2 items alone,
Correct.
which is, so I don't see how we can possibly get through another town meeting without have to figure out what we're gonna do. Might scrape through, but you're probably gonna,
If you give me the reserve fund transfer, I can get through next year, because then I'd have the
you'd have
32,000.
4,000 left with,
Correct.
hopefully nothing goes wrong.
If nothing goes wrong.
I am gonna have that
Okay.
7K hit coming with, steam traps, and that's something that.
That we have to do.
Yeah, they need to be
So,
done.
Bud, I can't make it regardless.
Okay, that's what I thought. No, the numbers are just
Yep.
staggering compared to what we thought.
So I see in this list a bunch of things around handrails and whatnot that wasn't allocated to the CPC funding.
Correct.
Why was that determined that it needed to be done?
They were egress points, and egress points have to have safe egress. You can't just board the doors. So one of them, the roof was failing and had trees growing through it. The other ones didn't have handrails to get up, and if you have stairs and you have a door, you have to have rails. It was all code stuff. We didn't do anything, there's no things we did that were wish list items. They were all code issues that had to be done. That's why we have faucets and insulation for under faucets for in bathrooms, fire protection services. The only thing in there that was kind of different was, with all the new doors we did, we went through and we got all the locks the same, so that the town itself has a set of master keys to all the doors in the building. That was only like 1,900. Other than that, everything else was code issues that had to be addressed.
So we did multiple code reviews on that building. Were these new things that weren't previously identified as code issues?
They are. Most of these all came out of the ADA survey that Michelle collected last summer, and that came out. So
And
it
then
was
when
a
we wanted
newer.
to get into the lease with the Friends, there were certain things that we had to do to make the building accessible for them and to allow for access points. Some doors had to be fixed.
But I
and things
thought
like
we
that.
had that all covered either under CPC work or under the 60,000.
And that's what I'm saying, that work was covered under the CPC, and will be. When the doors come in, they're coming in next week. When those doors come in, we'll charge it to the CPC money, because I received permission from the CPC and the select board to charge it. This is stuff outside of that.
Beyond.
Well, I thought the work on the ramp in the rear.
That did get charged to CPC.
It went back to
It looks to me like
We
It
did.
was debited and then we
Credited.
got a credit.
Right.
Correct.
That's those
Right. That
three
washes.
lines way off to the right. Those got reallocated back to
But
CPC.
if you look here at the bottom line balance, We spent 48, we reclassified 87, we have $40,103 left. That 8750, John, that you see, right here, that's 8750 right there, that did get reclassified.
When you say reclassified,
It got charged to the CPC.
It went back to CPC.
okay, that's what I
That's what you
assumed
asked.
based
Yep,
on
yep,
looking at
yep,
this.
Yep,
So when you go down to the bottom of that, right there, Mark,
right there.
Stairway roof labor.
no, I'm trying to resolve that bottom 48 or 40 with the 62.
Yep. What should have happened, the way, when we did the original budget, we thought the insurance was gonna be 6 and the landscaping was gonna be 14. So we went to town meeting and we asked for 20,000 a year for 3 years. So we asked for the, and we got we rounded it up to 62,000, because I think we did 32 the first year is what we put in there. Then we asked for an additional 30. What happened though is the insurance came in $6,000 higher, right?
Yep.
And the landscaping came in right where we said it would come in, 14,000. So to begin with, we had a $6,000 problem with the insurance, which we could have made up in year 2 or 3. I don't see that as a major, that's $12,000 or $18,000 more than we thought it was going to be, but we could have made that up. It's all these other little things that have come up that has driven this budget.
Right, but going back down there, and I
Yep.
apologize that
No,
I'm
that's
struggling
fine.
with this. We have spent 48.
Yes. No, we spent 40. Don't forget, the 8750
Came back.
was charged to the CPC money that I was authorized to spend. It got
So we've spent 40 and there's 22 left?
correct.
Okay. So what you're requesting, what are you requesting here tonight, other than a discussion? You're
Well,
looking
I
for-
wanted to have the discussion.
Yeah.
There were 2 things. I need 9,500. I can do the 9,500 and have Tommy do it immediately and charge it out of here. I can ask the finance committee for a reserve fund transfer. If, regardless of what we do, we're gonna need additional funds next fall for the Prescott School to get us through the next year. I don't have enough money to get us through 3 years.
Okay.
Is there
Go ahead.
a way at this point to add that into the budget that we're going to be adopting at town meeting?
You can create another line item in the budget if you want, under municipal buildings. However, we funded the 62 out of free cash. So that would change the way you had originally wanted to fund this. The original idea was to take it out of free cash.
Well, that was partly because it was done in the fall rather than the spring.
It was still done before the budget was set. I think we made the conscious decision, and Bud, correct me if I'm wrong. to
Yeah, I
take
think
out
it
of
was
free
done,
cash.
it was done primarily because it wasn't an operational ongoing, it was a 3-year set bang, and then it was gonna go away.
That's why. we did it out of
Theoretically,
free
it
cash.
could have gone away in 2 if Friends made their numbers, because they said that they would fund it, per the contract, remember? They said they would fund 20,000.
And their
in
business
year 3.
plan shows a $20,000
Right.
payment to the town in year 3.
Correct, so it was more because of the way it wasn't gonna be operational ongoing.
But it hasn't unfolded that way.
Correct.
It's unfolded to spending more than
Right.
just those 2 items, and one of those items was bigger than the school paid, when they paid $6,000.
And Tom and Mark, am I correct that the boiler repair and then the steam trap survey and the lumber for the railings that are here are not,
No, they haven't even paid those bills yet.
so that's in addition to the 9,500 that's sort of pending?
Yeah.
That's another 87-ish.
So that pretty much will expend the entire 62 this fiscal year, when that's all taken into consideration. We paid the landscaping, that covered us last summer and the winter and the spring, but we would have the landscaping start again July 1st. Correct me if I'm wrong, Tom.
Correct.
So we've already paid for the spring?
Yes.
Coming
He
from-
wanted 3 installment payments.
That's
how
fine.
it-
Well, that was for the snow removal. So snow removal is all taken care of. It was, it's a gamble you take on both sides, you had one bill to do the whole entire project. Worked out well, there weren't any issues that I'm aware of. They were in direct communication with Flynn Property, who took care of it. Mary's worked with them in the past, and it worked real well. The landscaping will pick back up in the spring, but that's minimal when it comes to it.
Okay.
What does minimal, couple
Well,
thousand?
So for the year, it's probably gonna be 5,000 to 6,000. 5,000. 6,000. 6,000. 6,000. 6,000. 6,000. 6,000. 6,000. 6,000. 6,000. 6,000. 6,000. 6,000. 6,000. 6,000. 6,000. 6,000. 6,000. 6,000. 6,000. 6,000. 6,000. 6,000. 6,000. 6,000. 6,000. 6,000. 6,000. 6,000. 6,000. 6,000. 6,000. 6,000. 6,000. 6,000. 6,000. 6,000. 6,000. 6,000. 6,000. 6,000. 6,000. 6,000. 6,000. 6,000. 6,000. 6,000. 6,000. 6,000. 6,000. 6,000. 6,000. 6,000. 6,000. 6,000. 6,000. 6,000. 6,000. 6,000. 6,000. 6,000
in addition to the 14 for snow removal, or is
No,
that?
snow removal's paid, so that one's done. So that for next year, I imagine he'll go up a little bit for his snow removal number. You know, he might go from 13.4 to 14, maybe 15 for the season next year, we'll see.
Understood, but how much more should we be anticipating for landscaping costs this spring in this fiscal year? Does that make sense?
Yes,
Okay.
I'm gonna have to count, I'll have to talk to him.
Okay.
Because we picked it up halfway through the year last year, and it wasn't a lot of mowing, and I
Okay.
had him on a low
It
schedule.
was very minimal.
Yeah, and then I also had him do a couple extra things when he was there last year, like some of those emergency stairwells had a couple feet of leaves in them, and there was trees growing on the side of the building, so he went and took care of all that. So there was extra stuff last year
Okay.
compared to what was normal. Like I said, in the beginning, I was treating this as, this is the budget I have for Prescott, use this to take care of all this miscellaneous stuff. 'Cause most of it was safety issues we had to deal with, safety and code.
Mark,
Yes.
could you, by this Springtown meeting, have an updated, this was supposed to be a 3-year plan, I think we're 1 year into it effectively, an updated plan for the next 2 years? And if you could, does it make sense to fund the next 2 years based upon that at this town meeting from free cash?
I would say we should probably add an article to the warrant for this purpose, yes. So the selectmen will have to make that, select board will have to make that decision to open the warrant and add the article if they so choose. Tom, we'll work on that, right?
Yeah, we will, we'll have to try to, I'll talk with Steve Byrne and Quentin with stuff that might be, we have to spell out two things. We have to find out what items in the lease were you responsible for or not responsible for in these large ticket items, and then budget for those. You know, we played for a boiler service this year, and a tune-up and stuff like this, and these steam traps, but beyond that, I don't know what our direction is, as in what the tenant's supposed to take care of and what I'm supposed to take care of. I don't know if any that's ever been really
Well, it's also, you know, when we put this together, you know, I know it sounds like we totally blew the budget, but we didn't manage that building at all. We had no idea what the costs were gonna be. We estimated, you know, we looked at what the schools had spent, and, you know, they spent what they spent. And they spent about $40,000 a year, but you saw those numbers. Obviously, you know, we have expenses that we were unaware of that we've taken on. We've made some of the repairs, but we'll have to look and see what the impact is gonna be. We were really blind in the fall when we put this together, really blind, more blind than I thought we were.
It's easy, the buildings we have now, it's easy, we have set data on what we did and what we, you know, what we spend every year. We've been doing the same thing, and they don't vary too much. Like I said, this is a great analogy, is the country club. When we took that on, we found holes in what the original plan was, and now we're finding them.
Okay.
So I need direction from the FinCom and the Select Board on what you want me to do with regards to paying that $9,500, how you want me to do it. Bueller, anyone?
I mean, I would turn to the finance committee for their 2 cents on that one.
I have another question on it. It sounds, you may have answered it, but if we've spent 60,000 in the first year, should we for now assume 60,000 next year and 60,000 minus the 20,000 the Prescott Group will give us for the third year?
Well, I don't think it's 60, David. I think it's more like 40, 45, or 47. When you get up to 60, it's the 9,500. This is a one-time fix, so it might be 50 more than 60. Are you disagreeing with that?
No, I'm not. I don't, that might be a little high, but you know, high's good, because if not, we come back, and we'll have to go through it, but.
So David, you're saying
we're
go
gonna
for
get-
100,000 at the
Well,
Springtown meeting?
the reason I ask is because as a FinCom member, I'm wondering if we budget low and the selectmen will keep coming to us for reserve fund transfers, or do we budget high and perhaps even have some surplus when we're done?
That's a good point.
That's,
Yeah, go ahead, John.
What, you talked about, something for the radiators?
the steam traps, that's what the streams, that's what the boil, well, the stream trap survey.
Steam trap. Say it 3 times fast.
Steam trap survey was done by, an outside outside group who will Alanco, who will apply to National Grid for a rebate to do the repairs. So National Grid will pay half of the $7,000. It says boiler repair, but it's actually should say steam trap repair, but it's all boiler related. So National Grid will pick up half of that $7,000 to repair these, which will make the system more efficient. It's running inefficient right now.
All right, well, how did the school district survive all the time in that building without steam traps?
They were running inefficient.
Uh,
They were running inefficiently.
Okay, I don't understand the efficiency, where we.
It has something to do, so whenever
what?
the condensate in the lower floors, I guess the steam, when it pushes around, it's a steam system, and it gets down to the bottom. Instead of pumping the condensate away, it pushes more of the condensate up the steam lines, which reduces the efficiency for the heat. And that's why National Grid will pay for it, because it's gonna increase efficiency. It's part of that, like that Mass Saves program. It's a big issue with steam systems. And why the school department didn't do it, I don't know the answer to that.
So the cost to the town, then, you're saying is half of the 7,000?
No, it's 7,000, because that's half, the total bill is gonna be 14.
Oh, good grief.
Who's paying the other half?
National Grid?
Okay.
And this will save the Friends utility expense.
But it sounds like this is not a required expense. This is an efficiency expense.
No, it kind of is, because in the basement, where some of these things are failing, it's like 90 degrees in the room, and there's steam in there, and it's creating moisture, and we have humidifiers running and fans blowing out the window. So it's a necessity. If the heat's on, they need to be corrected. And I think it's something they don't fail very often. It sounds like it's something that needs to be done every 5 or 10 years, as long as you keep up with the maintenance. And once you get caught up with them, they're easy to do one at a time and rebuild them yourself. But right now, we can't do it because we've never done it.
So I'm gonna ask you an impossible question.
Okay.
Presumably, if we continue on this path for the next 5 to 10 years, the Friends are gonna put in a request through probably CBC to fund a rather large renovation. If we were to renovate this building top to bottom, would this steam system most likely continue through that renovation, or would we replace it?
That's a good question.
Isn't
I
that-
think they would probably replace it. Everything's going to small ductless splits. They're individual rooms. Maybe for the larger rooms they would, but I bet for some of the smaller rooms, they may discontinue portions of it. Impossible. I don't know. I'm not a HVAC designer.
That's why I said it was an impossible question
Yeah,
for you to answer.
I think it's probably a 50-50 shot whether or not, because the boiler itself isn't that old. And they actually say doing this repair is gonna increase the efficiency like 25 or 30%, so we'll see what happens.
So wasn't the boiler replaced, but with a used model? like,
Nope, it was
5
a
or
new,
8 years ago?
it was a new boiler. It was Steve Byrne did it himself. He did it with, worked with National Grid. They gave him a new boiler. But he did the install himself, which saved a bunch of money. So the boilers, there's nothing really wrong with the
I thought it was a
boiler.
used boiler at the time,
I
too.
thought it was
My
as well.
recollection was a used boiler that they
Wow.
installed. I don't think it was new.
I may be wrong. I
Everything
wasn't
else is
involved
right.
with it, so
Yeah.
No,
I
are
thought
you
it was.
thinking about the other school, Florence Roach?
Florence Roach
No.
put in a brand new boiler.
that was brand new. Yeah.
That was brand new.
I thought Steve, because I remember him dismantling
Maybe,
the
I
old
could be
one.
wrong.
I don't know the answer. I can get
Yeah.
get that answer for you,
So,
but it's not the boiler that's the problem. It's
yeah.
the outreaching end of the piping on the fingers where it's not getting circulated correctly.
so here's my take, right? So even if we did a reserve fund transfer, we wouldn't be solving the issue because we
No.
still don't have enough money.
Correct.
Also, right, we specifically asked town meeting for this money for this purpose, and I think we need to go back and explain we need more money for this purpose. So I think personally, I would propose that we either do that at this meeting or in the fall town meeting. And if we think we can be adequately prepared to do it now and fund it from free cash, I would do it at this town meeting.
Personally, I would rather wait until the fall and see where we are, budget-wise, what our free cash gets certified at. Give us more time to understand if there are any more outstanding issues instead of going to this town meeting looking for money. I think we'll be able to cover the summer costs of the building with this. So I would rather wait till the fall, but I will do whatever the board and the finance committee wants to do.
I would kind of second Mark on that, just because I don't have a great handle on everything that needs to be done there yet. I really don't. I mean, I don't walk through the building every day. It's kind of its own little entity, and that was the way I thought we were treating it by itself and let it sit on its own. So if we're gonna start doing more, I'm gonna have to maybe have somebody go through there and say, what sticks out at you that's gonna need to get done, but I'm not gonna be able to do that before April, because we're in the middle of a bunch of other stuff.
My only concern, I'm sorry, John, if I may, my only concern with what I just said is when I'm gonna get the insurance bill for the building. I'm assuming that the policy is October through September, which means I can wait until the fall to pay it, to go to the town meeting. If that's not the case, then if I have to pay it in July, I won't have the money to cover the insurance bill. So let me clarify that. We can deal with this next week at the public hearing, if that's all right with the board.
When did the insurance policy begin?
It began in October 1st is when it went into effect.
Didn't we take possession September 1st?
I'm sorry, it went into effect, I'm sorry, I paid it in October 24th. It went into effect September 1st. So I'm assuming it goes September to September,
Right.
but I just want to double check that, because they may put it on the same as our town policies, which are July to June. So they may, I just don't know the answer to that, Becky. I want to be sure.
John?
Just- I'm sorry to interrupt, John.
My sense is we should only be doing essential things for safety, primarily for safety. But, we're not trying to refurb the building. And we shouldn't be doing nice-to-have things. We should be doing, and I think we are, but that's how I think we need to continue.
Don just looked up the policy. It is in the fall, so I can wait until the fall.
Okay.
So that's all I've been doing, John. I mean, there's probably, I know they have somebody they call whenever they need small miscellaneous stuff done. I don't do their the wish list stuff. I'm only doing the big stuff, the code issues, like I said, the roof on that stairway, handrails. I'm not sure about the boiler, this boiler thing was there before. I think it's more of a safety issue, especially with the steam that gets released in the basement and the moisture and stuff like that. And we're having to monitor it to keep it dry. I don't wanna have to go monitor it to keep it dry, so if we do this, that'll eliminate us having to watch it.
Yeah, no, I'm not
Yeah.
complaining about what you're doing.
No.
I just think every time something comes up, we need to ask ourselves, does this have to be done?
Bud?
My only concern, I agree with, we need to get better detail. My only concern with the fall is, what would happen if the fall town meeting says, I don't want to put any more money in the building? What would we do?
What would we do if the Springtown meeting said the same thing?
We'd have time to shut it down faster than in the middle when the bill's coming
That's a
in.
good point. That's a good point.
We would have no money. I mean, take out of the reserve fund, and then we'd have to, I mean, it just seems like when you go to town fall meeting and you know you don't even have enough money to get through that year, it just, I agree with you. I probably better numbers by having Tommy look at it for a longer period of time, but in the end, $40,000 or $50,000 times 2 is 80 or 100, and that's probably, when you look at insurance and whatever, it's already, what, 28.
So,
So, I mean,
go now and bump up the contingency component of the number. But do it this spring.
I get concerned going to the fall, that's just gonna
Okay.
not look,
I'm fine with whatever you guys decide.
Tom?
How about replacing everything I spent outside of the original plus the cost of the insurance? So if you put in the 7, the 2 bills there, the other bills for the other repairs that I did, anticipate the $7,000, anticipate the insurance adjustment, and just go back to the original starting number where we were. And just add in, just go to town meeting for the additional repairs I did to replenish that fund. That's a thought.
It is. And I don't know what that total is or how.
Well, it was 62.
It's easy to get. I can.
Understood.
Yeah.
Well, I'll tell you what, let me do this. Let me work with Tommy this week, come back with an estimate. The FinCom's gonna be here next week with us in joint session to review the warrant. If we're going to add an article, the board's gonna have to open the warrant to add that article. So let me come back with a cost estimate for you next week. working with Tommy and Dawn on the insurance and figure out where we're at. We'll give you an itemized budget, anticipated budget, and you guys can decide whether you want to do it in the fall or the spring.
And we put the 20K, and the Friends has committed to also give us in year 3. That'll obviously help out because.
That'll be an offset.
Yeah, yeah.
So,
I think it should be an article, whether we do it in the spring or the fall.
Yeah. You'd have to open the warrant, that's what I
So the
said.
voters,
Right.
Yep.
get some insight into what's going on.
so for me, I think it's important to do it this spring for 2 reasons. One is that I feel like financial articles of this sort are more appropriately all bundled together in one town meeting. So we're assessing our priorities and what we have to spend at a higher level. And I think that, you know, where we've already identified this problem, we kind of owe it to the voters to bring it forward sooner than later, as opposed to
That makes
kind of
sense.
adopting that risk to push it to fall and then potentially get caught.
Okay, I'll put it on the agenda for next week.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And so, Tommy, give the authorization to go ahead
Get the panel
to get the
ordered.
panel fixed, and we'll charge it to this article, and we'll add that as part of what we need to do. With the board's permission, I'd like to jump ahead to item number 6 in my town manager's report, which is the budget discussion, since the finance committee is here for that as well. So if you go to my town manager's report, the Groton Dunstable Regional School Committee voted last week to use $400,000 in E&D funds in FY20 to offset the proposed budget of the superintendent. That reduces our assessment to $308,731. Should the select board and the finance committee decide to fund the 2 proposed firefighter EMTs in FY20, the budget would be $30,161 under the levy limit. I'm going to go through the budget update and show you how we get to that 3161 in a second. But then I also put together 4 scenarios for the board to review with the finance committee. Scenario 1 on a 5-year projection is the original projection I gave you when I put the budget together in December. Scenario 2 is the superintendent's budget using the school's 5-year projection from FY21 through 25 and adding the 2 new firefighters. It shows we would need overrides every year for the next 6 years. Scenario number 3 shows the reduced Groton Dunstable Regional School District budget using their 5-year projections and adding the 2 firefighters. And then scenario 4 is the same as 3, but I've taken out the firefighters, just to show you what that cost is. So if you jump ahead, board members, in your packet up to page 55, I would like to spend a minute going through that with the board. Yes, David?
Was it explained or is it implicit in the superintendent's budget that the funds removed this year will be requested to be put back in next year?
Yes, and I will get to that when I show you the scenarios, absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
That's an excellent point. That's an excellent point. So if you look up on the screen, anything in black is the budget that I presented to the board and the finance committee at the fall town meeting. I mean, in December rather. So I think that's important for you guys to all understand that the black is what was budgeted, original budget that I presented to you in December. The protection of person and property is increased to $4,361,000. It's an increase of $64,039 from the original budget based on adding 2 firefighters and eliminating the call incentive. Health insurance does not get adjusted. We've already gone through what the health insurance was. So even adding those 2 men, the health insurance budget stays the same under that scenario. The regional school district budget of 23 includes the Neshoba increase of 43,507 and the reduction of the superintendent's requested budget of $308,000 by them using E&D. Offset receipts, that's the money that goes to the library. That's what the budget the governor has in his budget. Snow and ice on January 26th, when we had the joint meeting, I said the way we were tracking, I eliminated the $50,000 from the $200,000 that I originally put in. $93,000 in cherry sheet charges is what's in the governor's budget. $965,000 is what the governor's budget has in his proposed budget for state aid. And then when you take that all into consideration, we have a surplus of $30,161 based on all of that. And then what I did is I gave you 4 scenarios. The first scenario on this page here is the one that I gave you on 12/18/2018. I had a 5.33% increase here for the schools. There were no new firefighters added to the budget. I had a $200,000 snow and ice deficit, no override requested, and I gave you a balanced budget. And that's where we are. And then on the 5-year projection, we ran the schools at a 5.33% increase a year over the next 5 years, and the town budget going up 3.53% over that same period of time. The overrides would be $240,000 in fiscal '21, $315,000, and so on and so forth. And I think that's what Josh had talked about, doing one major override of $2 million based on the original budget that was proposed. So scenario number 2, we thought was important to show you, is if you take the superintendent's budget, you use their 5-year projection, which is not 5.33% over time, it's 5.89, then 5.82, then 5.11, then 5.09, then 5.07. Town budget all stays the same. You add the firefighters in fiscal year 2020, you fund the schools at the superintendent's level, and you don't do, you don't use the E&D number that the schools are using, because as you know, we always try not to use one-time revenues to offset operating budgets. That would give us a $278,570 deficit in fiscal year 20 that we would need to either reduce the municipal budget by or seek an override. And then you'd see we need overrides of 279, 438, 274, 305, and 339 over the next several years. One thing I want to point out, the reason these numbers are here, if an override in one particular year fails, the levy limit is lower the following year and the override would be greater, or the reductions would be greater. So please understand it's cumulative across the board. I hope that's understandable. Scott?
Just curious, this scenario starting in 2021 under snow and ice has a 0 there versus 200?
Oh, thank you for pointing that out. Yes, that eliminates snow and ice, and we change the way we do snow and ice. In other words, we don't carry that deficit each year. We fund it at the Springtown meeting and eliminate it. Otherwise, this number would be $150,000 higher. Excellent point. Thank you for pointing that out. I should have mentioned that. Scenario number 3 is based on the school district using E&D and adding the firefighters and keeping the snow and ice deficit at $200,000 a year, going back and not changing the way we do things. That would require a $764,628 deficit in FY '21. The reason that I took out the snow and ice is I had proposed to you to get the deficit down was eliminating snow and ice in future years. As a matter of fact, that 150 should probably be 0 as well. This 150 should probably be 0 as well, and that number would be 128. But just to show you, if we stayed the way we are, it's 278,000. Great catch, Scott. Great catch. And then scenario number 4 is we don't fund the firefighters. We leave everything else the same. The deficit is $698,000 next year without firefighters. And we're $94,200 under the levy limit this year, because you wouldn't be funding that $64,039 this year. Does that make sense?
Can I just ask,
Please.
on this scenario, the deficit or the override amount for next year does not include the 2 firefighters next year either?
No, and what I would say to you, Becky, is if you decide to add the firefighters next year, you have a deficit of 764 next year.
Wait a minute. But go back down to the bottom one.
Yep.
All right, so there's no firefighters in FY '20.
And no firefighters ever.
Ever?
Ever.
That's what I'm asking.
Yes.
And if firefighters get added in FY '21, that deficit amount goes from 700 something that's down below, plus another 760?
No, the deficit would go from 698 to 764.
764,
Yeah.
okay.
I thought that shows the gap between the two. I could have done a 5th scenario.
Right.
It would have been the same number, so I was already confusing you with 4 scenarios.
Right. Thank you.
Does that make sense to everybody, the way I presented that? Okay. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Yeah, Bud.
Well, how about a fifth scenario? Based on the fact that the schools have helped us out, so to speak, this year, they have, just because of the way they booked it with E&D.
That's this scenario here.
So if we go to scenario 3,
Yep.
and instead of, I have a couple issues with scenario, with the firefighters in first year being funded by an excess and deficiency fund by the schools, i.e. that's how it's
The
happening.
firefighters would be funded in fiscal year 20
Yeah.
through E&D use of the schools by reducing their requested amount. Absolutely.
And that to
yes.
me is a one-time, E&D is a one-time use theoretically. Just like our
Same
free.
for the schools.
No, I agree. So we're funding operationally firefighters with one-time E&D, which is going to come back the next year, and as that number shows, take a huge hit out of us because it's not going to be an operational number because that's the way that they decided to fund it this year. And so the two options were, I think you said, well, the one option was prior to this was if they charged us operationally for that number, the bigger number, we'd do an override potentially for firefighters and the schools.
That's scenario
That's
number
this
2.
year.
That's the 278.
Yeah.
Because keep in mind, when you go to scenario number 3, if you look at the schools, you see the 22,264 number right here.
Mm-hmm.
That's the number that the school budget would be reduced by the use of E&D.
Right.
In fiscal year 21, they wouldn't have that E&D anymore, and we would have to fund a 7.42% increase versus a 5.89% increase, because you'd have to make up that $308,000 next year.
Correct.
That's a good point, bud.
So if you stay at scenario 3, so by moving the firefighters from 20, and there's a couple reasons potentially do that besides this, it just feels something we wouldn't do if we would not take free cash and fund firefighters for 1 year and then dump it in operation the next year. I don't believe we would do that. We haven't done that in the past. So if the first one is just simply we wouldn't have had the money, we would have had to go for an override. Second thing is the second year the override is going to be a large override anyways, and it's going to be primarily because of the firefighters are already funded through the one-time hit this year, 2020, and then next year they would be in the operational number, so they'd be part of the problem next year, but it'd be exacerbated by the fact that they were funded this year as well, out of the school, not out of the school indeed, but the way the school did it. So that's one reason. Yet the second thing, there's a couple other reasons. One is we are starting a process to look at the schools and the town together. No, not the town. The town is looking at municipal and schools together to say what do we need to do differently to have the revenue line and the expense line a couple years out be equal, because obviously it's not. It's a $200,000 problem, a $300,000 problem. And that's caused by obviously revenue being one number, 3.7% or whatever it is, and spending being a higher number. And somehow we need to, over time, soon, figure out what will make that level. And we have the problem of the schools with the $10 million where they don't get any increases. But the issue becomes, and an opportunity becomes, when you look at 2022, wages and benefits, which are around $40 million for both of us. 0.5% of $40 million is $200,000. 1% is $400,000. And we need to look at the big numbers and say, can we get this thing back in line? Because it's going to be out of balance forever unless we do something. And that's what that committee's supposed to do. And I think, you're going to pick somebody. I think you're on it, Mark, and whatever. And I think that's an important thing for the town and the schools to get to. That's not going to happen this year. That's not going to happen next year. But there is an opportunity in 2022 to do something about that potentially, just because of the big numbers that are going to be contracts that are coming up for both schools and town. And it's, like I said, those two numbers, benefits and wages, represent 80% of the total number of both of us. 80% is in those two lines. So if we can get something on those two lines by negotiating something somehow, we need to think about it, because if we don't, I can't believe the town's going to want an override every year. Or maybe they will, but it's a big number. So to defer this, and then the other thing is when I looked at the fire report, just to bring that in, I don't want to spend a lot of time on it, but I looked at their analysis and it said, if the community wishes to enhance the service level, if it says fiscal and financial concerns within a community need to be discussed, conduct a cost benefit, educate the community to value, and oh, by the way, it's a 2-year implementation phase in. The first one's happened in January or December of this year. And then the next one would be December of next year. And then the second year would be December of 2022. So if this was actually approved, we don't put them on in 2020. We put them on July, let's assume that's what the town wants, July of 2021. It would be a year and a half from the first to the last, not 2 years, but a year and a half from when we decided to do it to when we put the second 2 on. So it would fall within there within 2 years. It would fall within, the town has gone through the analysis that said, you know, how are we going to get this in balance again? And maybe we won't, but we ought to think about how we can with people from different disciplines, which we didn't do last time. We didn't have the school working with municipal. We had us working, school working, but never did they come together and decide what can we do as knowing that this is a big issue. So I would, a fifth one for me would be firefighters in 2021, and obviously probably an override in 2021. It's just, because that would also say if we had an override and it failed in 2021, you wouldn't have to get rid of the firefighters, just put it on in 2020 or something else. Because we would be underwater at that time, and it would be ugly to put somebody on. And
Scenario 5 is a $764,000 override in 21.
And if that doesn't happen, the firefighters won't go on in 21 if you move them to 21. In the school, we would have to then figure between us and the school how we call out $700,000 of stuff.
Right.
That is a monster number. So that's why I would not want to put anything bigger in 2021 with money we know is going to come back and haunt us in 2020 to 21. So I would propose moving the firefighters. And I don't have anything problem. I mean, if the study says that's what you need to do, because that's the right thing to do, and in the time frame fits what the study said, just, okay, we do it. Maybe put on 3, or I don't know. We will have time to look at the 2 that we put on to figure out what is the right thing in the town with those 2 to level out the service levels in the town for response time, and then move forward. I just don't like putting firefighters on with that E&D and then having to fight it in the next year when who knows what's going to happen.
So I don't disagree, Bud, with a lot of what you said. To me, the 2-year is a little bit concerning only in that that report was issued a year and a half ago. So while a 2-year implementation may have been viable at that point to a problem that had been identified, to kind of push off the start date to implementation and then still have the same duration is potentially a little problematic. Personally, I think there's some appeal to pushing off the implementation to align with a potential override next year, in that, you know, I think we're still missing a tremendous amount of data, and that potentially in that time frame we could work, or the fire chief could kind of put together the information that we really should have asked for as a board to justify his request a year ago. And unfortunately, we kind of shut that down before we had any discussion. So, my 2 cents. Yeah, Art.
First of all, the original request by the fire department was 2 firemen in 2019. You go back and look at all the requests. And the request for 2 more in 2020. I have some major issues with that report. I think I covered that in the document I handed out tonight. We're talking $64,000 in FY 2020 for the 2 additional firemen. That again comes to about $25 a year on the average tax bill in the town of Groton. And we can push these numbers around any way you want to push them around. But if you go back and you look at scenarios 1, 2, 3, and 4, the main problem is not the fire department. The main issue is that large number, % increase on the school side. which is more than twice what the municipal budget increases on a percentage basis. So I do have concerns about keep pushing this out, kicking that can down the road over and over and over again. And me, for $64,000 a year, $25 a year on the average tax bill, I think we have to move forward with it. And I hope you'll get a chance to go through the detailed analysis that I handed out tonight to the select board and to the finance committee, because I think there are some major issues with that study and that report. Thank you.
Jack?
Thanks, sir. Well, I wanted to state that a year ago, the board was here and it said it didn't have enough information to make the decision on the firefighters, and it asked for a thorough analysis. It said it couldn't make a decision until it got that analysis. You asked for a cost benefit, you asked for alternatives, you asked for community feedback. You actually got none of those the other day. You didn't get a cost benefit, you didn't get any alternatives, and you got some reference to a community feedback, but actually the report itself said that community feedback was one meeting and that it was a meeting where there was no atmosphere for dissent, and it basically acknowledged that meeting was not a valid piece of community feedback. So you got none of what you asked for. So you're really no further ahead than you were a year ago. At that time, you said you didn't have what you needed to make this decision, and so you either have decided you don't need information, or you have to acknowledge that you're at the same point. I heard reference tonight twice from people who I thought knew that this was not the case, that the study recommended this thing, that the study states that there was a problem, that it found a problem, or that it recommended an increase in firefighters. It did not. It specifically did not. In fact, the study didn't even point out the benefit of additional firefighters in terms of response times. I heard a member of the committee here the other night say, quoted it, said specifically recommended additional firefighters. Read the study. It doesn't say that. It says if the community wants to pursue 24-hour firefighter, it should go about this process, and they laid out the process. It in fact explicitly states in the conclusion, there is no right level of service, that the right level of service is what the community comes to define and decide for itself. That's the process you should go through. That's what you should have gotten in the study that you asked for 9 months ago, was the information that the community could use to determine the cost and the benefit of this. How many lives would be saved? What would the cost be? What are the alternatives? This is what the community needs. Not all of the community. There are plenty of members of the community that know without a bit of information what they want. They want more service today and they want more tomorrow. And those are fine decisions for those people in the community, but there are others who really want to know what they're getting. And you as policymakers, you're not responsible for making emotional decisions. You're responsible for providing a community the information that the community needs to make good decisions. You're supposed to be above that emotional level. The thing is, there isn't really a crisis here. There's not a crisis at all. You're not trying to solve a crisis, at least not the crisis that has been at the focus of all of this. The focus of all of this is response time, and the study shows that the response times have not degraded appreciably. And so there's nothing to solve here. In fact, what you're asking for is a service increase. In fact, you got a service increase in the fall, and you're asking for another one, or another service increase is being asked for here. We're barely keeping our heads above water in terms of costs, maintaining a level of service at schools that are going to cost us money. But we're asking for additional firefighters to provide more coverage than we've got today, better response times than we've got today, better response times than we had 4 years ago when nobody complained about response times. In fact, people were satisfied with response times then. Arguably, the data that you need to make this decision is available. Arguably, the data is really not about response times and what the benefit is. That's available. You could get it. I promise you, you can get it. Arguably, the data really is all about call firefighter availability. The thing that I think is really the biggest concern that I've heard from the chief and from others is that someday we're going to run out of available call firefighters. But that wasn't discussed in this study at all. It was there was some hand waving about it, that we need to do better, but there wasn't any kind of projection that said, we've got response today, but X years from now, at the current rate of decline in call firefighters, we will not have a response. That is absolutely knowable. We have rates of volunteerism that are available to us, rates of response to calls that are available to us, and we can predict when that day will come. That day could come tomorrow, and when it comes, there won't be anyone who answers the call, and we'll all be sorry. But that data is available, and you should know that data before you go and spend this money. Or at least you should give the community that data so the community can decide if they want to spend this money based on it. Thanks.
I think if you look at the document that I handed out.
Boil that down for me in like 10 words. I couldn't hear half of it.
I'm sorry, what?
It is, I will say, extremely hard to hear on the telephone. People in the audience are speaking.
So Barry is looking for the 10-word summary of what Jack just put.
There's no crisis. Response times are where they were 4 years ago. The data to determine whether or not you actually have a call firefighter availability crisis is available and could be had if you decided to study it. And lastly, you are no further ahead than you were a year ago when you asked for information, set a task force out to get it, ask that task force to come back with cost, benefits, alternative, and community feedback, and you have none of it. You're basically where you were a year ago. If you want to advance now, you have to acknowledge that you're advancing without the information you said you needed a year ago.
Okay, so it's not an opinion, it's someone telling me where I am and how I am. Okay, I got it. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So before we go to Art, who's already spoken once, is there anyone else who? All right.
Yeah, the document that I handed out tonight actually provides the information that Jack was saying we needed. And in fact, that data was available. It was provided by the fire department, but was not included in the final report. And that had to do with mortality rates relative to response time. And what happens when the response times become much, much longer. In addition, if you look at the data within that report relative to unstaffed and staffed hours, what you'll find is there's a huge variation in the numbers, the number of minutes on unstaffed hours versus staff minutes. And in fact, in the data analysis, there was absolutely no effort to do any level of variation analysis or standard deviation. But the range of minutes that I show in that document that I handed out tonight is huge in the unstaffed hours. And that, based on the other studies that I included in the document I handed out, show that the mortality rate goes up dramatically after about 10 minutes. And if you look at that data as to the response time and understaffed, you've got times of 24 minutes in that data. And you've got a huge, huge variation and a huge standard deviation, and nothing was done to analyze that, which is why last week I pointed out this should have been done on medians and not on averages, but if you do averages, you got to include standard deviation and variation, because that variation is huge. And if you look at those numbers, the ranges that I gave in there, in that document that was provided at the December 11th meeting and included to some point in the final report, you got real problems on how long it can take to respond in an unstaffed period. That's 6 to 9 o'clock, 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. in the morning. So that data is available. It has been provided by the fire department, was not included in the final report.
Becky.
So just taking the bigger picture here, my opinion has not changed since last week. I basically agree with Bud. We have hired 2 new firefighters since last year, so we do have more and better coverage than we did a year ago. There are other recommendations in the task force report that I think we should not ignore, and that we should move ahead directly on the recommendation to set up to more aggressively go about recruiting on-call people. I was impressed. There were some really good ideas in that report, and I think we should move ahead on that. I do think that there is data that we did not get to convince me that and I appreciate Art has given us a lot of data. The kinds of questions I'm looking at is how many of those life-critical calls do we get during the night per year? And I think we do have to pull back and make the hard cost-benefit decisions based on data, not based on the kind of emotion, Bud said it was a right brain, left brain, whatever, I'm not sure which one, but it's an emotional issue, I understand that. Everyone would love to be reassured that there would be coverage at any minute of the day, but I think it's our job to look at what we can afford as a town. There are certainly people who are already very, very stressed in paying their taxes, and raising the taxes clearly is going to happen. Next year, we're going to be in trouble no matter what we do. I don't want to exacerbate that by adding 2 firefighters this year. I think that we should see what we can do with the 2 that we have. I would like us to be able to, one of the pieces of data that did stand out to me was the fact that the 6 p.m. to 9 p.m. time period, if we could reallocate the 2 people that we just hired to cover with 2 people until 9 p.m. each night, I think that we would take a big step toward improved coverage, and I'd like to see us try to do that.
Connie?
Connie Sartini, the Groton Herald. I understood last week, Mark, to say that there would be 2 budgets presented for action at Springtown meeting.
Only if they were to go for an override this year. That's the I'm sorry if I confused you on that.
So.
If the board decided to go for an override, you'd have to have a contingent budget.
You'd have 2.
Correct.
If the board decided
If they decide not to, then no.
So the voters don't get to vote on whether or not they want it. They have to take whatever's presented to them and not given a choice. Is that correct?
Yeah, if they don't go for the override, somebody would have to amend the budget presented by the finance committee to add the 2 firefighters.
It could be amended on the floor of town meeting?
Absolutely, but you'd have to find the 64,000 someplace else because you'd have an unbalanced budget. Gary, do you agree with that?
I understand.
By voters, were you asking about town meeting attendance?
Yes.
I would agree with that.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry if I confused the issue.
John?
Go on.
I still think the best course of action is to put a override on this coming year's, 2020's, budget for the firefighters, the additional 2 firefighters, and let the voters decide. I've listened to the argument for 18 months before I even became a member of the select board around what the data should be, how to look at it, what was important, what wasn't important. And I can't find consensus even around, what would it take to have you say, oh, we really need them. And we can study and we can study and we can study, and we're just going to confuse people more and put it to the voters, let the voters decide. And we'll see where we go from there. Because I don't necessarily, it's not as simple as people are making it out to be. There's several or more components of it. For cardio issues, for trauma, which is severe wounds and so forth, and breathing problems, the time to get there is important, but also very important is that we have the equipment such as defibrillators and tourniquets and all these kinds of things available, and that we have experienced, trained people there to apply them. That's where the critical piece of it is. Years ago, they used to dispatch EMS people from their homes. Some would go to the station and get the ambulance, and some would go straight to the home. But the people going straight to the home didn't have the equipment that they needed in those 3 kinds of situations until the ambulance got there. And it would cost us a fortune to give every EMT that equipment in their trunk. So I feel like we are just kicking this down the road, kicking it down the road and not addressing it. And that's why I say, go to the voters, tell them what it is, let them decide. Instead of us sitting around and debating whether it's important, they need to have a say in this. And I think that's the fairest way to get it to them. Enough said.
So for me, and then I'll continue along. Yep, just as Eric and Barry. I agree in some part, John. For me, however, I think we, on the municipal side anyway, have not done enough work so that folks who are voting potentially at the town meeting understand the other priorities down the line that are competing for those same dollars. So that's concerning to me. I'm concerned with kind of the idea of override fatigue. I think that, you know, there's tremendous data out there, and we're getting it from all kinds of sources, and I'm not questioning the reliability of any of the data. But to me, still kind of the person we haven't heard from in a formal way is the fire chief. And that he has the ability to understand the factors, to review the MRI report that was done, to understand the task force process, to understand the data that was given to them, to understand, you know, what processing went on there. And I think that's important. Becky and then Jack. And I forgot Barry.
I want to just talk a little bit about the use of an override as a way to gauge the voters' opinions. You know, when I first heard that idea last week, I thought, well, that's a reasonable idea. But then when we recognize that it appears almost guaranteed that we will need an override next year for a budget that doesn't even include the 2 firefighters, that sets us up for having an override this year and an override next year. It potentially sets up a little bit of we'll have an override for the firefighters first, and then second, we'll have an override that is, in some people's minds, going to be seen as more for the schools than for the municipal side. And I think that's always a dangerous route to go down. I know, you know, there's decades of history of not wanting to exacerbate that split. And I'm in favor of not exacerbating it. So as I thought about it some more, I realized that I think it's hard to get an override. It's hard to get an override to pass. We talk about it needing it next year, and like as if we'll get it, but we might not. And I think that as the people who are charged with looking more carefully at all this stuff and making recommendations to the voters, we should use an override when we are all united and in agreement that we need this extra money to run the town, which is very different from saying we'll put something on an override to see if people want to pay for it or not. I think if we're not convinced, if we're not in agreement, and we're not all committed to needing this money, that in itself, I think we fail the voters in that regard by not giving them clear information. And that if we know we are going to need an override, we will have a much higher chance of getting it passed if we are all united on needing it that year.
Okay, I'm going to go to Barry, Jack, John. Barry, go ahead.
Okay, sorry to be off mute. I just want to respond to something I heard Becky say. I think, you know, her question is a valid question to ask, and I would caution this board that perhaps we should intend to ask that as a question, not as a request to staff. I'm not in charge of staffing the fire department. We do have a strong chief, and there's lots of reasons for that. Is to say, you know, what is the impact of, you know, scheduling these people at that shift that Becky recommended? I just think we shouldn't be telling him or telling anybody to staff a certain way, but I think that we've got someone there who knows what they are doing with staffing, and if there's a question about why aren't we doing this or why aren't we doing that, that can be asked and should be asked instead. So that's my 2 cents.
Thank you. Jack, wanna grab the microphone again?
So, just to follow up on John's suggestion that you should just bring it to the voters, I think that's absolutely the case. But I think that voters are due to be well prepared. And I think that an issue that involves both framing the issue and providing information, if you bring this to the voters today, you're basically saying we've got this idea of 2 new firefighters, but you can't express the need. There actually is no defined need versus where we were. You'd have to basically express it as an addition of services, the outcome of which you don't know, except for perhaps an improved response time, the value of which you can't express. And you want to provide that information to the voters. And that, I think, is really, that's the core value of taking something to town meeting. If you want, you can always go to town meeting and ask town meeting an emotional question like this, and you can have a predictable answer. You can let people put forward whatever statistics they want because they're not vetted. Some of the studies I've seen referenced talk about response times, but what you're not told is their response times from when the person incurs the accident or the issue, and CPR is administered immediately by people on site, and the outcomes that happen when that happens, which is completely different than when a phone call comes into the to our fire station. These are completely different numbers and they're not relevant, but those kinds of numbers make the rounds through email threads and at town meeting, and they cloud the argument, and good decisions aren't made from them. That was, I thought, the point of having this committee, was to come up with good, solid data that a committee of X number of people agreed upon. And I think if you go to town meeting without that kind of good, substantiated information, you just end up with a mob scene at town meeting, and emotion and fear win the day.
Thank you. John, you?
I want to point out something in Becky's comments, and they relate to what Mr. Petropoulos just said. If I thought in 1 year from now, we would, using Becky's words, all be in agreement on what to do about this particular situation, I would vote for it. But I don't believe that. I don't believe that. I believe a year from now, everyone will still be arguing about the data and whether the right data was used. And was it properly, was it mean, was it average, was it this, was it that? I'm not finding fault with what anybody's saying. I'm just saying I don't see us whittling this thing down to anything close to we're all in agreement. And I'm talking about the leadership here in the town. We're all in agreement, all right? We've got data on the table. There's never going to be there's only one solution. I don't believe that. And everybody's going to argue about it. So why not put it in front of the voters, or let them decide, and we'll move on. We're not giving them bad data. We're giving them the data that people in this town spent a year trying to put together. And before that, Mr. Petropoulos and others were doing research and putting numbers together. If I remember right, the issue about response times, I think, Jack, originally started with you and the ambulances about 6 years ago. Something in that order. Yeah, so here we are. We're still arguing about it. This is just kicking the can down the road, and I don't think we should do that. The voters aren't stupid. They'll listen, they'll read. Those who come, it's only about 100, 150 that come out of the whole town every time.
But the override is different.
Well, we don't know an override's different. We don't need them. We don't need anything like
I
a
mean, more
majority or
voters.
anything for an override.
An override happens at the ballot, and there's a whole lot more people who show up to vote, is what I mean.
Well, there usually are, but they'll make their choice. And listening to us argue weeknight after weeknight after weeknight after month after year is not bringing any clarity to this issue at all.
Jack? And then Bud?
John, I take your point. I think you've witnessed a really difficult 9 months where a committee got together, should have been able to come up with this, or was tasked with coming up with this, and they more or less had one person on the committee who was very analytically oriented. You had others who already knew what they wanted the day they were appointed, and I think that it couldn't have happened. It was preordained that it couldn't have happened. But I promise you, John, and I would bet that you'd agree that we could come up with such things as the trajectory of available call firefighters over the next few years and the number of call fighters needed in order to provide service, and show a graph at which point there's the break off of where available call fighters no longer provide the needed service. I'll bet we could do that based on history, because those numbers are pretty hard and fast. And I will bet you that we could probably provide the average number of lifetime sensitive calls that we're going to get in a year, and the average benefit that's provided. And even if we can't get the number, we can get some agreed upon range if you have a small group of people who are honestly tasked with providing answers, not getting to the answer that they want. And I know that I can help to do that. I know I can work with people like Kevin Lindemer to do those things, and I know I can work with the chief to do that, because I've worked with the chief before to do these things. And these are good and useful data from which people can make the emotional decision they want, or the data-driven decision they want, or the decision in between. But absent it, we're just going to have a mob scene.
Bud?
I just want to clarify a couple things. One is there's no override in year one in this scenario. It's simply the money's there because the school, as I stated in the beginning, the school, the way they have funded us, if they go through E&D, is going to allow us to have enough money to put the firefighters on with no override. Correct, Mark?
Well, the schools aren't really doing that.
No, they are.
No, it's Dunstable that's doing
But
that.
it doesn't matter. The school has given us the money in an E&D fund so that they're not charging us operationally.
Because what they're asking for can't be properly
I understand
matched
that,
by
John.
Dunstable.
I understand, but if they left it the way it was operationally, we would be having an override. We would not be talking about what we would have. So then it would go to the voters. We would have an override. We don't have to have an override because we have $30K surplus money at the bottom here. If I think that's what the chart says, $30,000. So there is no override if you put the firefighters on this year. No override. The override happens in year two because that's when that whole E&D from the schools now flips into operational, because that's the way it happens. I don't think they can have another E&D of that amount. And therefore that number gets to be a very large number. And that has the firefighters from year one also in there, obviously, if they're put on here. I'm not arguing whether, I don't know whether one firefighter is right, two or three. I'm only saying that I would like to see what the two we put on just did, and how's that help us when we put them on the crazy hours that are really an issue where it says there's a couple hours that would improve dramatically. And the study says 2 years, and you can argue whether it's 2, 1.5, or 2.5, but it's certainly within the 2-year range. And next year, we're going to have a ballot question. School, fire, and whatever else is going to be on that thing, because that's just not the school number, that's 760. It's also a big municipal number in there. And so therefore, that's when we should do it. And there can be a ballot, can be a lot of education. If we want to do more analysis with the fire, maybe we should. But I'm only arguing the timing of the money is not right the way it is now, because it's not the way we would normally run our municipal budget by using E&D funds to fund operations. We wouldn't do it. Right. And we're only doing it now because we have the opportunity. And there's no override. So that's why I don't like funding it this way. I'm not arguing. I think maybe next year 2 firefighters, because the study shows the same thing it shows now, we'll put them on. We'll put the ballot, we'll say, here's what we found out. Maybe we find nothing else different. And there it is. It's on the ballot. People will vote. And they can put it in, they can put it out. My guess is they probably will put it in. But I don't like putting it in this year when there's no override. There's no only town meeting, and now we have a huge problem next year. That was my point. Not whether we need the 2 firefighters or not. I think you can use that argument forever. I'm just talking about the funding of it, the way we're funding it. It's not how we run the business in this town. It's not.
Did you have something to say, Gary?
I do.
Okay, go for it. Then we're going to wrap this up, folks.
So, shockingly, I'm going to agree with a lot of what Bud said, but you know, again, if it was a matter of us voting to use E&D to hire these 2 firefighters this year, you would not have my vote, period, end of statement. what we would be doing is going and finding other services that we want to cut in order to add these services. And the fact that we're in a position where this seems like it's an easy decision, this is what I said last week, it is not an easy decision. And I would say once again, if we want to do this year, I think we should be viewing it as if we don't have the reduction from the school department, and we should figure out where to find enough cuts this year to afford it this year. Because if you look at that big number next year, it's ugly. And you know, I've said it before, I'll say it again, right? I could support 2, I could support 6 if it's the right number. But I think it's not smart if we hire 2 people this year, knowing when we hire them that they're at high risk of having to be cut next year because we don't have enough money for them. And I don't know what that buys us as a town.
All right, so now that we've chased ourselves around and around in circles, we're gonna cut this off for the evening. I'm sure everyone's feeling like we have a lot of clarity right now.
Yeah.
Mark, was there an end goal you had to this discussion tonight, or have we kind of lost sight of things
I
a
always
little
have
bit?
an end goal. My end goal was budget direction on how you want to proceed, and you've made no decisions
Okay,
tonight.
so we've given you all you're gonna get.
Okay, understood. I'm
Good
ready to
luck with
move
that.
on with my town manager's report.
Alrighty, very good.
Yes.
Alrighty.
I do want to say one thing. You guys are going to have to make a decision on the budget in the next 2 weeks, or we don't go to town meeting with a budget. I just wanted to point that out to you. So somebody's going to have to decide this. Maybe not me, maybe not you, but somebody. Okay.
All right.
That was very good, Allison.
Yeah. Good grief. So
So
we're
back to my town
item
manager's
number
report.
3?
Yep. Item number 3, as you are aware, there were 2 articles on the Springtown meeting warrant that asked the town to adopt legislation that will allow the town to charge an excise tax on short-term rental facilities. The board needs to determine whether or not to proceed with this. I put them on the warrant as a placeholder pending your discussion tonight. To help you make a decision, Dawn did a really, really great job investigating the number of facilities in town that provide short-term rentals and the anticipated income should we proceed with the surcharge. Keep in mind, the surcharge is 3%. And it's for Airbnbs and other short-term rentals greater than a week, less than 31 days. So what we did, or what Dawn did, I should say, is she found 11 properties through research in town that advertise short-term rentals. So Dawn put together this spreadsheet that says, okay, here are the 11 properties, there's their per night cost. If they were at 75% occupancy throughout the year, charging a 3% surcharge, the town would take in $12,211. I think 75% is not realistic. So then I said, okay, let's look at 50%, so Dawn ran the numbers. 50% would be $8,000, and then 25%, which I think is more realistic, is $4,000. So if we were to implement this law, there are several requirements that would have to be followed. The fire department and the building department and the Board of Health would have to do code inspections. There's a lot of work to monitor it. We would have to have somebody designated to continue to monitor sites to see who's advertising on short-term rentals and the like. And I really don't think that the income potential of this 3% surcharge covers the amount of work that we would need to do this. I don't think we have enough properties in town to justify this. So my recommendation to the board is not to pursue this and to remove it from the warrant.
Becky.
Can you just clarify what the article number is on the warrant?
Oh, yes, Becky, that's a good question. Let me, I think it's 16 and 17. Let me get that up on the screen for you to show you the 2 articles.
So when I first saw this, and when I can find it again, yes. No, 16 is the stretch code.
It's page 17, Article 17.
Okay. So this is based on the law that the legislature passed, and our town council sent us notice and said we could consider this. Is that right?
Correct.
Okay. Yeah, I'm not in favor of doing this. First of all, I think I think it's hard to know that we would even have a comprehensive list. A lot of it's kind of the underground economy. And I think the hassle of collecting it and of imposing this tax on people who are doing this is not worth it to us. So are there two articles?
Well, yeah, Becky, there's one that actually sets that adopts the act, and then the second one is a zoning article that sets the zones in which you can have it.
Yeah.
So that's why there's two articles.
I'm really not interested in touching this at this point.
Other thoughts, John, Barry?
If the expenses to implement and administrate it are significantly less than what the revenue would be to come in, then I wouldn't support it. Now, I haven't seen numbers yet we've seen numbers of what we might take in, but I haven't seen dollars and cents put to the expenses to get there. To get us to that point. I also asked
That's hard to say. It's hard to say. That's why they give you those numbers.
Well, that's what we get the big bucks for, right?
Yep.
I guess the other piece of this is I asked that we find out whether or not we could approve this, but not necessarily implement it.
I copied you on my request to town council. I have not heard back from him.
Okay, so we haven't heard back from that. My idea in that case was to say, well, if we can put it in place, but not necessarily implement it, but it would be there if we finally get to a point where the business is big enough to have the revenues exceed the costs, we'd be one step better prepared. So we haven't heard an answer back on that. But based on what I've heard so far, and the absence of understanding, whether we could do it and not get it approved but not implement it, I would say leave it alone. I don't think we lose anything. Well, I'm not sure whether we lose anything by not doing something now. In other words, what I'm saying is if a year from now it's clear that we should be doing it, can we go and still get,
of course,
an approval?
If we haven't put it on the warrant this year, we certainly could, but there is the risk if we put it on the warrant this year and it gets defeated, then we would need to wait 2 years, I think, before we could bring it up.
Unless the planning board brings it back.
Oh, true. Okay.
The planning board can bring it back shorter than 2 years.
From the zoning perspective.
Correct.
Right.
The bylaw you can bring back anytime.
I had a related question, but I don't know if Barry has anything he wanted to say.
Barry, do you have any comments or questions on this part? I'm not hearing you.
I'm good with the assessment that if it's going to cost us more than we're going to earn, year over year, and doesn't pay for a firefighter or anything else that we could use the money for, then it just seems like another tax that we don't need.
Very good.
My related question is on the room occupancy tax. Is there language which is a different article?
Mm-hmm.
Is there language that makes it clear that does not apply to short-term rentals?
The general law of the Commonwealth, room occupancy tax are for hotels and motels, specifically for that. This is, what ended up happening is you had all these Airbnb things come in, and the legislature says, a lot of communities that have a lot of those,
Right.
say, hey, we can't apply the room occupancy tax to that.
Right.
It doesn't apply, so we need new legislation, and that's where this came from.
So what about regular, not Airbnbs, but regular B&Bs? Wasn't there at one point, I'm thinking I remember that there was a limit or a lower limit, like you had to have more than 4 units?
Correct.
Okay,
100% correct, Becky.
all right.
So I agree with what I'm hearing, and that kind of brings us to a consensus of 4 folks right now that we're not seeing much upside to pursuing this. Jack, did you have a comment or question?
I just wondered, is this residential residential only, or would this apply to things like renting a barn? And maybe was the library on there?
No, the way I wrote, that's a good question. The way I wrote the zoning bylaw is it would not apply in resident, you wouldn't be able to have these in residential zones unless you're grandfathered. I thought it'd be a business, but the planning board would have to decide how they wanted to adjust it.
No, I meant, would you only be applying this to instances where people come and sleep overnight at a place? Or would you be applying this to instances where someone rents a barn, for instance, for a wedding?
Greater than a
for day?
week, shorter than 31 days.
But it effectively is overnight places where it's lodging, correct?
Correct.
It's explicitly lodging.
Greater than 7 days,
Okay.
less than 31.
But it doesn't really define that it's just lodging. People could be, I mean, it is lodging, but people could be living there for 30 days.
Right, but people rent barns to store their antique cars.
That wouldn't count.
Right, right.
That wouldn't
It's
count.
not that.
That is not that.
Right. But also on the zoning, I would have an argument with saying it couldn't happen in an RA zone. That's where I think most Airbnbs are.
But it sounds like we're not moving forward with this probably right now, so.
Well, I'd ask the board to vote, if that's the intention of the board, vote to have me
move
remove
that-
Articles 16 and 17 from 17 and
17,
18.
18.
I move that we
Is Article
remove,
17 something that the planning board has already blessed?
The planning board has advertised the public hearing, they have not even considered it yet. I would ask them to cancel their public hearing if you pull the stuff off the warrant.
Well, is it their call to take it off the warrant or ours?
No, this is our article,
Okay.
not the planning board's.
No, but the 17 is the planning board's.
No, 18 is a zoning article put on by the
18.
select board. 18 is a select board article put on a zoning amendment that I sent to the planning board and asked them to hold a public hearing on. It is not the planning board's article.
Okay.
I move that we remove Articles 17 and 18 concerning short-term rentals from the warrant for the Springs Town meeting.
And Barry, did I hear you second that miraculously?
Hello?
All right, I will second that then.
Yes, I seconded it. I
All right.
seconded it.
Very good. Is there any further discussion? All right. We have to do roll call vote because Barry's remote.
Pine, aye.
Manugian, aye.
Geiger, aye.
Peace, aye.
Very good. All right.
I've
Number
given
4.
you a letter from KP Law, who serves as town council for Pepperell and Labor Council to Groton. Pepperell has asked them to undertake a review and provide advice on a proposed intermunicipal agreement for police details among Pepperell and several surrounding communities, including Groton. Under the Massachusetts Rules of Professional Conduct, Rule 1.7, they need a determination from the Groton Board stating that their representation of Pepperell will not affect the exercise of independent professional judgment on behalf of the town of Groton. I think you guys did this before when they were doing the intermunicipal agreement on the sewer. Alice, you might remember that. So this is just a standard to say, yep, you can review that because it's going to affect both Groton and Pepperell. And you won't, change anything for Groton for that purpose.
And this particular review is limited to police details?
That is exactly what you're given the clearance on, just that one finite issue. So I'd ask the board to authorize that, allow town council, or labor council to serve in that stead.
So I would entertain a motion allowing KP Law to represent the town of Pepperell in reviewing Okay, I will second that for discussion. John?
For discussion, okay. I'm curious, the towns have different rates with which they pay detail officers. And are there issues around, well, if you go to Groton, you should get the Groton rate, or if you
No,
go to
this is
Pepperell,
mutual
you
aid, no, I'm sorry, John, this is mutual aid on when they would come to back up Groton in the case of an emergency.
No, it talked about
You're
details.
talking about police details.
It talked all about details when I read the
Yeah, it's
documents
all
from
about police
KP.
details.
Oh, did I
It's all
misunderstood
about
when I read
police
it?
details.
Yeah.
And, if that's the issue, I just would like to
Oh,
know
I
that
got you,
we've
I
got a
got you.
big issue.
Our hourly rate is contractually obligated. If we were to enter
But
into.
for our officers.
Correct. If we were to enter into an intermunicipal, and we pay out-of-town officers the same rate. And when our officers go to another town, they get paid the rate of that particular town. If they're trying to change that, I would have to go back to the unions and collectively bargain that, because our officers get paid a certain detail rate when they're working in the town of Groton. So if Pepperell wants to lower that, when a Pepperell officer comes into town, say, that changes the whole ballgame.
Well,
So-
I think we should be aware of what,
We'd have to see the intermunicipal agreement to see what they want us to sign. You would have to
Going into-
approve the intermunicipal agreement.
yeah, I understand that.
So can we, at this point, Mark, can we get,
Because what the conflict is here is that KP Law represents us and represents Pepperell.
Correct.
That's really what the issue is here. And they're saying that they believe that they could represent both towns fairly, even though there is the potential of an appearance of conflict of interest on the firm's behalf in this matter. That's really what we're saying here.
Mhm.
So,
I don't fully understand. They're gonna try to put together a mutual aid intermunicipal agreement. We have not had one of these. We don't have mutual aid with the police officers?
Not when it comes to details.
we have
why-
mutual aid for.
We have mutual aid agreement for emergencies, and I misunderstood. I thought they were
Right.
changing that. I missed the word mutual, and I apologize.
So
We
why,
have intermunicipal agreements for mutual aid in the event of emergency.
so why do we want, I mean, why does anybody want this intermunicipal agreement for details?
You'd have to ask the town of Pepperell.
Good point. Can we ask you to do that?
Sure.
And get a copy of whatever they're proposing KP Law do, so that we can understand what their intent is here? We do have a motion and a second on the table.
But is there urgency on this? Do we need to vote this tonight?
Motion withdrawn.
Yeah. Thank you, Barry.
What did he say?
Motion withdrawn.
Oh,
So to me, I mean, it doesn't matter a whole heck of a lot if there's urgency or not, since we don't understand what it is we're being asked to agree to.
I agree.
I'll bring it back.
That would be great, thank you. All right.
I have nothing else. I gave you a copy of the warrant. I want to remind you that you have your,
I have questions about a number of the warrant articles, and maybe they were discussed at the meeting that I missed 2 weeks ago, but it didn't sound like that to me from the minutes. Is it appropriate to ask my questions?
It's on the
about certain
agenda.
Of these?
I'd be happy to answer anything I can.
Okay. The question about dredging James Brook,
Yep.
will the Conservation Commission have to grant permission? Will they have oversight on this?
Yes.
The
It's Article 15.
Yeah, the Article 21, it has to do with the forestry, making agreements with foresters.
Yep.
I just wondered why it would be you signing this, why not the land use director?
Chief Procurement Officer enters into agreements.
Ah, okay, because so it's a and it's, but the Conservation Commission, or they would issue the request for work and,
Yes.
and write up all the
They've
details and
already done it,
everything.
yep.
Yeah, okay. Hold on, let me go to the next page. The additional liquor licenses?
Yep, I presented that. That was a proposal. We discussed it at the meeting. We get a lot of phone calls for people looking for if we have any available package store licenses in town. So I explained to the board when I put this on the warrant, that we are at our max. We do get questions, and maybe we want to consider adding a couple of liquor licenses in town. And you need to get special legislation to do that.
So we would be asking the legislature to grant us more?
The authority, right now, the way the state law is written, the number of liquor licenses you get is based on your population.
Uh-huh.
So on Groton's population of 10,000, whatever it is, we are authorized to have 3 package store licenses, and that's it. And you've already issued 3 package store licenses.
Uh-huh. So can I ask if there was discussion among the board about this?
We talked about it. I presented to the board. The board never took a position on it, waiting for the public hearing, so it's up to you guys to decide. It was just a proposal from me, based on phone calls that we get in our office looking for those types of licenses.
So, I mean, on the one hand, there's some increase in fees that we would collect, which would be helpful
Mm-hmm.
to budget. On the other hand, there may be some downsides.
Just an idea I had, based on, the phone calls that we receive and the information we get from businesses.
Okay.
So when is the public hearing scheduled for?
Next Monday. 7:15.
Article 35, and I don't know where that is, so I'll let you find it. It talked about some revolving funds. And I guess I wondered, I've never heard of these funds before.
You vote them every year.
The home recycling equipment?
Yep.
What does that mean?
That was the, as a matter of fact, the board had follow-up, and I think I sent follow-up up to the board in a separate email when they asked that question. That's basically for equipment up at the transfer station that that the transfer station sells to people for recycling efforts, whether it's
It was like the compost bins.
compost bins and things like that.
Okay, great. What's affordable housing marketing?
The affordable housing marketing one is when our affordable housing coordinator works with the planning board to sell affordable housing units or to market affordable housing units. The developer pays us.
And had to buy advertising.
Yep,
I see.
the developer has to pay for that advertising. It goes into a revolving fund, money in, money out.
And what about the building rental fund?
You created that at the last year's Springtown meeting to cover the Prescott School, if you remember correctly. It was on last year's warrant.
Oh, I remember now that you remind me. The boat excise tax?
That was passed 2 years ago at town meeting. It was brought forward by the Great Lakes for the porta potties.
For paying
Nope.
porta potties at the boat
Correct.
launches. Okay. There were a bunch of typos that I noticed. Who should I talk to?
Me.
About?
Me.
Offline.
Yeah, not here, but
We haven't
you.
started to proofread.
We haven't
yet,
proofread
we're
the
not
warrant
there
yet.
Okay, all right. I didn't know whether some of them were.
We'll catch 'em.
Were written by the lawyer, were written by town council, or,
No, no.
all right, I will get with you. I'll talk with you, Don. Do we know where the historic volumes cabinet that the CPC is proposing is going to be located?
I think that's the town clerk's request. So I believe it'll be in the town clerk's office. This one here, that's the town clerk's proposal.
Yeah, okay. I'm just curious if there's room in the office for this new cabinet, because part of why he wants to move them out of the vault is that the vault is too full.
Yeah, so I think that the town clerk, I'm sure, has something in mind, or he wouldn't have asked for this.
Right,
I would guess.
okay, thank you.
All right, moving on to other business.
Yep.
Before we jump into these things, and before I forget, more importantly, I did have a brief update today on the status of our investigation. The attorney is planning to meet this Friday with a couple of the key people, and we'll be scheduling things moving forward from there. We talked a little bit about our interest in wrapping this up, and he's going to do what he can to accelerate that along. So at this point, the delay is logistical in nature. So the next item is no littering signs?
Yeah, select board member Peace asked that this be added to the agenda. I've given you a copy of the bylaw that was passed at the 2017 Fall Town Meeting, which says that whoever disposes of garbage, trash, refuse bottles will get a fine of $300. And Barry had asked whether or not we were going to install signs alerting the public. I don't know, sometimes you go into a community, littering is punishable by fine up to X amount of dollars. I talked to Tom Delaney, that was never his intent to do that, but I need direction from the board if you want him to do that. So that's why this is on the agenda.
Does posting them in that way help us in any way, in terms of making it more enforceable or anything?
I think it just alerts the public as a reminder, don't litter. If you do and you're caught, you could be fined up to $300, you could be fined $300. Tom Delaney was not intending on doing that, but it's up to the board to direct me one way or the other.
Barry, did you have any clarification?
It was only on, sorry, yeah, apologize for breaking in there, Allison.
That's okay.
I thought that it was only on town-owned land, is that correct?
Correct. But that would be public ways, Barry.
My question is, there's lots of conservation land around and other things like that. If someone goes alongside the street and throws something in a conservation land, is that considered town-owned land, or is that, that could be conservation trust, that could be, there's lots of other entities in town that own our land. Not our land, own land around the streets.
No, Barry, let me correct you. The law says household items on a public or private way, meaning the sides of the street within the public's right-of-way. So it does not include conservation land.
Okay, so household items, does that mean someone throwing something out of their car?
Correct.
Okay, so it does. So I guess the question comes down to, does the board wish to fund a set of signs to notify people that that's the law? And the other question is, how do we go about enforcing that law?
Well, usually what happens is if we find a bag of garbage on the side of the road, this was the main intent of this when it first came up, is if somebody, dumps garbage in a bag and you go through it and you find their name and address, we have the opportunity to find them. I don't think anybody's gonna be watching Allison drive down the street and toss a beer can out the window and then go after her. I don't think that's the intent of this particular law.
Those are returnable anyway.
They are
Yeah.
returnable, so you wouldn't
Yeah.
do that.
We pick them up on Wiley Road all the time.
I agree, but I don't think signage is gonna change that.
I agree with you. I don't think, it just,
Also, if somebody dumps a refrigerator on the side of the road and we can
So
prove that.
this was a request from a citizen. It came in an email. I want to make sure the board discussed the citizen's request, understood that there are people in town who are very frustrated with the fact, as I'm sure most of us are, that people are throwing stuff all over our side. In fact, I know this morning as I rolled out my driveway, I saw a nice Red Bull can on this freshly hewn snowplow. That's awesome. It's no big deal. I can pick it up, put it in my recycling bin, but it's not always that easy. Stuff gets thrown into our woods, it gets thrown in all over the place, and it's just disgusting, to be honest with you, and people need their heads checked to do that. And I think people get frustrated and they want to know what we can do about it. If the board decides they can't do anything about it, there's no money for it, the signs won't deter anybody, that's fine. But I think people have a right to have that discussion at our board level.
Absolutely. So to me as an individual, I don't think that the signs will particularly help with anything. I think pretty much everyone knows that they should not be disposing of their personal trash in that manner, and signage is not going to be a deterrent, and there is some cost to it. Other folks? Jack? With the microphone, please.
So when I saw this on the agenda, and it sort of hit home a little bit. On my street, we have residents who use their garbage containers and leave them on the end of their driveway permanently. And I wonder whether, and is, I think, the expected practice to take it out the evening of pickup and to return it that evening or shortly thereafter. And there are cans that have lived on the street, on my street, for well over a year at this point. And I wonder whether or not there is an interpretation of this law that would include those cans as household trash or containers or otherwise kinds of things covered by this. And there's an example perhaps of where some form of town communication might be useful, whether it be something in the electric bills or otherwise distributed to people, reminding them of this and or other forms of trash. I agree that signs that say don't be a dope just don't work. But I was looking for an interpretation on household trash cans.
So Mark, is that something I guess that we can?
Yeah, I can look into it. I don't think it would. It would include that, but I can find out.
Sounds good. John?
We might think about sort of a position in between instead of having them kind of scattered all over town, which I think isn't going to help. We could post them wherever we have put the stones that say
The entrances to town.
welcome, whatever they say. All are welcome. So that people entering town are brought up to speed on it. If it's town people doing trash on their neighbors' lawns, I just don't think we can change that very much. But at least there would be some reminders out there. So it's just an idea. That would be 7 or 8 signs.
Yeah.
I guess. Or 9, I don't know how many there are.
I can't remember. So I need direction from the
Right,
board if they want me to
so-
proceed.
I, as an individual, have no objection to the idea of putting this in the electric bill or with a tax bill or something like that. I don't think signage is gonna be particularly effective. But,
I think it says down at the bottom that the police department's responsible for enforcement of both of these items.
yep.
Yep.
And, yeah, I'm kind of torn on this. I mean, I think it's shocking how much trash does get just thrown out people's windows, car windows, and end up in the side of the road. I know that every year when the Grange sponsors the cleanup effort, there is a huge amount that comes in because good people go out and pick it up. I wish there was a way to stop it, and I'm in agreement with the rest of you that posting signs maybe isn't really going to do much good. But if there's a way to add reminders into something that gets mailed to people in their houses, that might be useful.
So you want me to add something to the, work with the electric light department to put this in the bill? To
Well,
alert people?
we would just need to get scheduled with them
Yeah, that's
for
what-
envelope space, and then someone would have to put the
Does it
document
cost about, what,
together.
$500? Does it cost about $500 to do it?
Well, we also have an article on the warrant to, that's related to this, that makes it illegal to drain water onto the sidewalks on streets.
So you want to wait until?
So you might want to wait till after that.
That's not a bad idea, send
And
both
then
out.
send something out that says all these things, and you know, that, I'm not
That's a
sure
good
when the
idea.
timing is right, but also the change that we made, or what we did, the vote that we took about you need to shovel the snow off the sidewalks is something that, I don't think is terribly well known in town, so we might include that if we decide to send something out in the election.
So I agree with you, Becky, 100% that if we're gonna do it, you know, if that bylaw passes on the water one, I think we should include both in. That would be, you know, one-time notice, so. If it's all right with the board, we can wait until after town meeting to see how that goes.
Yeah, I think
Sounds
so.
good.
Okay, excellent.
All right, the next.
Thank you.
The next item on the agenda is to determine a member to serve on the, again, a tri-town budget committee, which is really finance committee, select board, school committee, overlapping with both Dunstable and Groton.
So it's both towns in the school district, right?
Correct.
So is where the
Correct.
three came from.
Right, and this, yes, so this came about, I think, from the joint meeting that we had at the high school library several weeks ago.
Right.
And there was discussion around the likelihood of needing an override for educational purposes, for municipal purposes in both communities, you know, a year from now. And recognizing that probably the most effective way to educate the public and potentially advocate for the funding that we would need is to all work together in an organized fashion, starting sooner than later. So I think that that's what this is looking for.
So don't we have people meeting in that triumvirate now?
I don't believe so.
We did when we had a committee working on revising the municipal agreement, but that happened already.
When Kristen was the school superintendent, she set up quarterly meetings
That's what I
of
thought.
Yeah.
Groton selectmen, Dunstable selectmen, FinCom members, myself, Dunstable town administrator. Allison, you sat on it representing the school
absolutely.
committee. And then when Kristen left, that sort of went by the wayside and we haven't met since. So I think this is an effort to rejuvenate that, Becky. I believe, correct me if I'm wrong.
Who's initiating the effort?
I think the school committee has asked, I think Marlena brought it up at the, at a school committee meeting, then she
Yeah.
alerted you to it a couple of weeks
Yeah.
ago at one of your meetings.
Marlena has been appointed by the school committee, and Bud has been appointed, I believe, by the finance committee.
So we need a representative from this board.
Right. This is something that I'm interested in and would be willing to do, but I don't know if others.
I move that we nominate Allison Vivian to be a representative on the tri-board committee.
I second that.
Any further discussion? All right, we need a roll call vote due to Barry's remote location here.
Pine, aye.
Manugian, aye.
Geiger, aye.
Peace eye, why y'all laughing at me now? That's
No,
not fair.
and I want to say extreme gratitude to Allison for being willing to do this.
I thought there might be a runoff here, but interesting. All right. Does anyone have anything else under other business? All right. Mark, are there updates on any of the ongoing issues?
Yes, there are a couple. With regards to the highway garage renovations. The building committee held a public meeting last Thursday, rather, and it was recorded. Hopefully, it's been replaying on the cable, where Greg Yanchenko, our architect, came in and gave a really good presentation and went over all the plans and talked about it. The committee asked a lot of good questions. There was some refinement to the plans. We're going out to bid next week on the project. We did receive a cost estimate, 95% cost estimate for the project that the committee is meeting tomorrow morning at 8:30 to review that cost estimate and make any revisions to the plans that are needed prior to the plans hitting the streets the following week. So it's been a whirlwind. We're working hard. I think they're good design plans. I don't know, John, if there's anything you want to add. You sit on the building committee, but that's the process we're moving forward with. And I'll have a better update for you next week with the final estimated costs and the like at that point. I don't know, John, if there's anything you want to add.
I would just add that anybody who's interested and wants to come tomorrow morning is welcome to. It's not a public hearing or anything like that, but if people want to come and listen.
Where and when is that?
8:30 tomorrow morning in this room.
Right here. They're welcome to.
So that's the only updates that I have under the informational stuff.
Okay. Mark, when you, just as a side note, when you reach out to Pepperell to get a better understanding of what they're asking KP Law to do, will you just ask about what's going on with the landfill, if that's something that has been resolved somewhat or has died down, or whether it's still?
And I had a question. The proposed policy on major initiative planning and the committee charge for capital planning committee, they sort of both got wrapped into our goal about the MICA, major initiative and capital asset planning. And is anybody working on that? I can't remember who was that maybe Josh was gonna do that?
I think it was Josh.
Yeah, so Josh was doing the major initiative planning. My thinking on the MICA, and I had actually talked to Mark about it briefly, is that I will put together something for us to respond to, if you will. And then we can decide whether we want to, I assume we would want to move forward with that sooner than it would come up if we were just reviewing all our policies, but.
Right. Okay.
So I will put together something that may be gibberish, but.
That'll be for a future agenda.
Yeah,
Correct.
yeah.
Yep.
Thank you.
Are there any liaison reports? All right, we have 2 sets of minutes. First ones are the regularly scheduled meeting of February 25th, 2019.
So I wasn't there for that meeting, so I don't think I've heard. Can I make the motion?
I move we approve the regularly scheduled meeting minutes of
February 25th.
February, thank you.
February 25th, 2019.
Yes, February 25th, 2019, thank you.
I will second that. If there's no discussion, then we need a roll call vote.
Geiger, aye.
Manugie and I. Pease?
Peace, aye.
And Pine abstained because I was not there.
Very good. The next set of minutes are from our regularly scheduled meeting of March 4th. Are there any corrections or comments on those? Not hearing any, I would entertain a motion to approve them as presented.
I move that we approve regularly scheduled meeting minutes of March 4th, 2019.
I'll second.
All right, that's been moved and seconded. Is there any discussion? Not seeing any. We need a roll call vote.
Pine, aye.
Manugie and I.
Geiger, aye.
Peace, aye.
Very good. Unless somebody has something else, we are at the end of our agenda. And we are adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you very much.